All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to trace the really surprising history of a powerful geopolitical idea. This whole concept of Russia as a kind of prophesied, biblical-level bad guy.
You know, when most of us hear the phrase evil empire in relation to Russia, our minds probably jump straight to the Cold War, right? And specifically to Ronald Reagan. It just feels like a 20th century thing, born out of that clash between capitalism and communism. But what if I told you the roots of this whole idea go way, way further back? Back to a time of competing empires and a wildly popular take on biblical prophecy. Okay, let's get into it.
So to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to rewind the clock, way back to the 18th and 19th centuries, and this fierce geopolitical showdown between the British and Russian empires. For about a century, they were locked in this struggle for control over Asia, a conflict that got nicknamed the Great Game.
For over 100 years, these two superpowers were just on a total collision course. And it wasn't just one big war. It was this slow burn, this series of major showdowns, from Russia proving its military muscle in the Great Northern War to the head-to-head fight of the Crimean War that cemented Russia as a huge power and a direct threat to British dominance.
And when you boil it all down, their goals were just completely at odds with each other. Britain's main goal was to keep Russia in check and protect its super important trade routes to India. And their strategy? Prop up the failing Ottoman Empire to act as a kind of wall. Russia, on the other hand, saw itself as the rightful heir to the old Byzantine Empire. They wanted to rally Orthodox Christians, kick the Ottomans out of Europe, and finally, get a warm water port in the Mediterranean.
And this quote from Queen Victoria herself, man, it just says it all. She makes it crystal clear this was never really about helping out Turkey. Nope. It was about who was going to run the world, Russia or Britain. This crazy intense rivalry created a really strong motive for the British to paint Russia as this dangerous, aggressive villain on the world stage.
But here's the thing. The political rivalry, that's only half the story. The motive was there, yeah, but the story they needed, that story needed a hook. And this is where things get really weird and take a sharp turn, from the world of politics into the world of prophecy.
Okay, so get this. At the exact same time that British and Russian soldiers are literally fighting and dying in Crimea in the mid-1850s, a Scottish preacher named John Cumming starts putting out these books that connect what's happening in the news to the end of the world. And we're not talking about some obscure guy. This dude's books were outselling pretty much everyone else at the time. So what was he writing about? Well, he zeroed in on this really mysterious figure from the Bible, a guy named Gog, from the land of Magog. Now, the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel basically describes Gog as this powerful enemy from the uttermost parts of the north, who's going to lead this final epic battle in the last days. So naturally, the big question on everyone's mind was, who is this Gog guy?
Well, John Cumming had an answer. And his answer perfectly mashed up Britain's biggest geopolitical fears with this popular religious belief. And it created a powerful story that, as we'll see, would stick around for a long time.
Through this, let's call it a creative chain of linguistic and historical connections, Cumming made his case. He argued that the ancient names you see in the prophecy, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, were actually code for Russia and Moscow. So here's the crucial part. He took Britain's #1 enemy on the world stage and said, yep, that's them. That's the prophesied enemy of God from the uttermost parts of the north.
And you have to understand, this wasn't some fringe theory that people laughed at. His book, The End, where he lays this all out, was a phenomenal bestseller. This whole idea just became an established part of a certain kind of theology from that moment on, and it really cemented the concept in the public's mind.
So what happens when a huge political fight gets a stamp of divine approval? Let's put the two pieces together and see what we get.
It was really the perfect storm. You had the geopolitical situation, which created the need for a villain story. And then, boom, this prophetic interpretation comes along and hands it to them on a silver platter. It took a really complex imperial rivalry and turned it into this simple black and white story of good versus evil. And, well, those are the kinds of stories that stick.
So here's the big takeaway. Long before the Soviet Union, long before the Cold War was even a thing, the script for the evil empire was already being written. And it wasn't written in some political think tank or a government office. It was written in the pages of these super popular religious books, all fueled by a 19th century imperial rivalry.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
How many of the other ideas we just take for granted today have these kinds of bizarre, forgotten histories behind them? Histories that are way stranger and go way deeper than we could ever imagine.